Welcome to Halftime, a show dedicated to equipping and inspiring people to accomplish what God has prepared them for. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a Halftime alumni, and these webinars are actually part of my Halftime journey. I want to thank you so much for joining us. Halftime is focused on helping you create more meaning, joy, and impact in your life. And if you're feeling a bit that way, or maybe you even know someone that's in that season, you can find out more by going to halftime.org. That's HALFTIME.org. And I'll include that information again at the end of our program. Today we're discussing turning pain into purpose. Today we have Lloyd Reeb and Halftime alumni Jon Sundt. And Jon is a fellow Halftime alumni who has experienced deep pain through childhood, but then went on to build a large, successful investment firm, only to discover that his core passion is actually helping millions of students across America avoid drugs that took his two brothers' lives. Lloyd Reeb is a successful real estate developer, author of 3 books, and the founding partner of Halftime Institute. Welcome, everybody. I hope everyone is well. Jon, I'm so struck by the photos behind you. Those must be quite meaningful.
Well, it's the all-star wall of the Sundt family. We have my 13-year-old son. We have my 20-year-old daughter, probably at 8 or 9 back there. We have my father, who was a Navy SEAL here in San Diego. And of course, we have my wife. So if you make the wall, you're in the inner family circle of the Sundt family.
So, Jon, when your dad told you to do something, you didn't mess around, right?
I didn't need to join the Navy, Lloyd. I was in the Navy in my house.
Wow. What a great national hero to give his life that way and invest in our country's safety, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've been in that kind of man cave you have there. And isn't it interesting, Jon, that one way to get to know our friends is to spend time in their space, right? And play basketball with your boys and kids and their friends and just hang out. There's something special about that, being on the journey in each other's homes.
Yeah, I think if I remember, Van smoked you pretty good, Lloyd.
Yeah, he did. But the excuse was I had dress shoes on. That's the only reason that a 14-year-old kid just trounced me on basketball.
It's okay. He gets me too.
Well, Lloyd, it's always a pleasure working together on these programs, especially since these confusing months. And it's so fantastic to have our huge crowd here today. And I encourage everyone that has joined us to continue the conversation. We would appreciate it if you would ask questions down in the Ask a Question link. And in the second half of our program, Jon will answer those questions. We also would love for you to respond to our poll that's also down there at the bottom. And our poll is going to guide Jon into where he spends the most time in our program. And we'd also love to hear where you're from in the chat. So please chat away there. We'd love to see what's going on. Now, Lloyd, pain is something I believe most of us really try and avoid, much less revisit it. Is there really more value in focusing on a brighter second half than revisiting pain?
Well, that's a good question, Doug. I think sometimes the brighter second half comes out of our pain. Every one of us has experienced pain, and many of us, if not all of us on this halftime webinar, are at an inflection point in our lives, right? Where we're looking for what God has next for us. Maybe not ready to change our platform, but we're ready to redirect some of our time and talent, and we have some options. And because very often the pain of your past provides a passion for the future, it's worthwhile for all of us to stop and just spend a little time reflecting on the pain of our past and what the implications might be. So in this 30 minutes, short 30 minutes together, Doug and I want to give you the privilege of looking under the hood in Jon's life and seeing what he's done with the pain of his childhood and losing his brothers through drug addictions and overdose, and explore how that could have affected you, how it may have caused you to drive for success in your first half. Sometimes the loss of a loved one can cause you to bury your pain in performance. Sometimes the pain of childhood poverty causes you to pursue success or behave in certain ways. Sometimes the pain of being belittled because you're short like me, or because you're not a great student or not a great athlete, or you have something funny about you that others choose to ridicule. Some pain leads to anger and to despair or retreat. There is a big difference, though, between living a driven life because of the pain in your past and living a called second half. The next season of your life could be more characterized by being called than driven. Driven is a frenzied life. Being called is often enables you to live a more measured, sustainable life with deep sense of eternal purpose. I've noticed in watching people who move from being driven to called that they can live in the moment more freely and experience the moment more freely because their life is rooted in the faith of the person who has called them. There's no such thing as calling without the caller. So we want to start by asking the question, what has been driving my success? And Jon, take us back into your childhood, take us back into how you responded, what you've done in your career that might have come out of that, and then what created an inflection point in your life. You and I met 5 years ago, and I just remember that night. It was a beautiful San Diego star-filled night. We were having dinner outside, and I can't believe that we've been on this journey for 5 years, and I've watched so much transform in your life. So take us back through that journey.
It's a privilege to be here, Lloyd. And I think everybody on this call has a story. Mine, I came from a good family, father, mother, San Diego, raised in a pretty normal home. My parents got divorced when I was in my late teens, but before that, it was a pretty normal home. And I had two younger brothers, Eric and Steve. I'll actually show you their picture. That's me.
Sweet.
That's me in the middle. And Eric is 1 year younger than me, and Steve is 2 years younger than me. And we were like the Three Musketeers. Everywhere we went as a team, as a group. And my dad was he was a good dad. He was a bit distant, but he was a good dad. But in the junior high years, my brothers started experimenting with drugs. And 1 in 4 families in America has addiction. We know a lot more about addiction now than we did 30 or 40 years ago. It's not a moral disease. It's just a really bad illness. And a lot of addiction is grounded in what happens in your early teens. The average age of use is 13 years old in America for illicit substances. So Eric and Steve started experimenting with drugs. They got deeper and deeper into drugs. My little brother Steve got addicted by the time he was 16. I remember going to rehabs with my little brother. I remember going to group with my little brother. He eventually got his act together through a great program called Teen Challenge. But one weekend he went out and he did too much cocaine. And he had a little girl at the time. He was in his early 20s. He was trying to get his life back together. And his heart stopped, and he actually died in the back seat of a police car. And I got a call in the middle of the night. So it was a long, drawn-out battle with Steve, and a very painful one when the battle was ended. Eric, my little brother Eric, he got pretty involved in psychedelics and other types of drugs, and eventually he ended up in a mental institution. And when he got out of the mental institution, he ended up committing suicide, jumping off the Coronado Bridge. So I was, I couldn't imagine losing my little brothers, and in a short period of time, by the time I was in my late 20s, my two little brothers were gone, and it was just a tremendously painful time for my family. I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to the pain of addiction in your family or with your kids. God help you. And Lloyd, at the end of this call, don't please give everybody my email, because if any of you want to reach out for any reason, I want to make my personal email available to counsel and talk to anybody. But that's where I was. That's where I ended, and I ended up taking all of my focus and my drive, and I just buried myself in work. And I ended up getting really good at burying myself in work, and getting really good at doing what I did. I built a company and sold it. You guys can look that up on the intro. But I built up a company of 150 people and sold it to a Fortune 500. But underneath all that, there was this pain. And underneath all that, there was this story that was the bigger story. I look at my career in the commercial world now, and I don't want to discount it. I'm very proud of it, and I'm very thankful that I had it and blessed. But it was the meta story of what happened in my younger years that really had the most impact on me today.
Yeah. So when you and I met, I was struck by your drive, your passion, your sincerity, and this deep longing to make the next half really count. And you had already started the Natural High organization to try to provide alternatives for Common Core curriculum for students around the country to substance abuse. But you weren't really sure if that was just a good thing to do or if that was your calling. And what I've loved watching since then is the convergence of your passion for a Common Core type curriculum that's a nonprofit, and then for-profits that all fit the same mission statement. And, I've got your roadmap here, Jon, from our, I don't know, I've got an inch file full of conversations. And if you and I were to start the first one 5 years ago and read through them, it's like watching a flower just blossom. The clarity and the convergence and the joy and the impact. And it all came out of stopping long enough to recognize the pain of your past and then use it almost like jujitsu, right? Use it as you take its momentum and use it to your advantage, even though it's such a sad thing. So take us into that journey, finding freedom and convergence around that purpose.
It's a journey I'm still on. Like all of us, we're all works in progress. But at first I was real upset with God. I was angry. Both my brothers had a faith background, but and I was spiritually wounded and emotionally wounded. And I think spiritual and emotional wounds that aren't dealt with just aren't good. And sometimes we bury those in work, and they come out in relationships, they come out in communication style, they come out in unhealthy behavior. So I had to go through this spiritual healing, basically. And I had good counselors in my life. I had good pastors, good friends. And it reminds me of the ancient American Indians. They used to sit around the fireplace, and they would show each other their wounds. And they would talk about the battle wounds they had and the scars that they have. And they would talk about the pain and the suffering they had. And by the time the circle was over, there was a deeper bonding. And that's the way life is. We all know friends that know our deepest pains. And we all have, hopefully some close friends that know our deepest wounds. And it's with those people that the biggest bonds come from, and some of the greatest learning. And the Apostle Paul and James talk about counting joy in your trials. And they talk about trials actually preparing you for something greater. Like trials aren't just, trials. They're actually, God's not necessarily bringing those things on you, but he's using those things, as horrible as they are, to prepare you for more. And it's the Christian faith is of course starts with Jesus showing us that example all the way through. And most people know and trust people that have been through a lot. When you think about wisdom is usually battle scars. Somebody that's wise has battle scars. So part of my healing was to understand the wounds that I had, and then God giving me an eternal perspective. Like, what's the eternal perspective? And I was an expert at drug addiction, and I was an expert at rehab, and I was an expert at prevention. And I became more of an expert at in these things because of what I had been through. And it became really clear to me that I wanted to change the culture, change the way my brothers looked at the drug life and got sucked into the drug life. So I created Natural High, naturalhigh.org. And I would encourage everybody here to sign up as a parent. It's free. And you'll get a blog and an email that'll basically make you an expert at prevention and make you an expert at trying to help your kids stay away from drug and alcohol abuse. So God gave me this pain, he gave me this healing, and he gave me this heart to help kids. So the number one journey I've been on with Natural High, we're in tens of thousands of schools, I think over 25,000 schools. We're not even sure how many kids we've reached. We know we've reached well over 10 million kids.
Wow.
We have hard data on a subset of that. I also have another business that God brought before me that helps people with mental illness and they need care in schools and school systems. It's called Care Solace. Care Solace. And then we have a third business that God brought me. It's kind of crazy. That's on parenting kids with a guy that I think is a kid whisperer. He's the best guy I've ever heard on how to talk to teenage kids. His name is Tyler Durman. So all this information I can make available to you. But yeah, God gave me this platform. I had this mission to take this pain into the market, and God gave me this platform through these three businesses to exercise the wisdom, which is really battle scars that came up.
So, and Jon, you don't play a CEO role in those, even though that was your role at Altegris, because you got more clarity, right, about where your real contribution is. Not that you can't be a good CEO, you were, but you're kind of chief vision officer, right? So talk about your, this deep longing to help people avoid drug addiction and to help parents help children with mental wellness issues turns into your ability to conceptualize stuff and turn it into technology. So take us inside that and why you choose not to be the executive director of naturalhigh.org.
Well, I realized early on that we're influenced by stories. And Jesus knew that. He spoke in parables. And the alcohol and tobacco companies have known this for years, that you brand a lifestyle, make it attractive, and get kids into that. If you look at the tobacco industry, they discovered reams of research that they did on how to change behavior of kids. You can't change behavior of kids by scaring them. Every kid knows drugs is bad for them. Every kid knows driving their cars. It's okay to give them the facts. It's okay to give them awareness. But the real way you change kids' behavior is you show them a new storyline, a new social norm, it's called, through cultural icons and figures that they look up to. And you tell them those stories, you bring those stories into the kid's living room or into the kid's classroom, and you have a Major League Baseball player or a basketball player or a musician or Tony Hawk, a skateboarder, or Kelly Slater, a surfer, talk about how he made life choices that took him down this path, not this path. So my vision was to give kids, I looked at what happened to my brothers, and through that, they thought that whole drug culture was cool. So I thought, let's get the coolest people in the world and show these kids how that drug culture is not cool. So it's based on science. It turns out that science is right down the dead center of everything we do, but it's very practical. It's very practical. And it's a very similar approach with Care Solace and with Tyler Durman, the parenting business.
Talk about Care Solace, because that's a fascinating idea as well. And what I want all of us to see is how these are just contiguous. They're beside each other, and you can build a portfolio. And it's not about it being nonprofit and writing checks, although you do a lot of check writing, that God can use for-profit platforms too. And sometimes he uses them side by side, right? So talk about what Care Solace does.
So Care Solis, this guy came out of the woodwork calling me to be on the board. And this is kind of sometimes how God works and the universe works. And finally, I sat in a couple of board meetings and went, wow, this is a real business. And what Care Solis does is it shows school systems a way to plug their kids into all the resources for mental illness outside of their walls. And they do it in a way that's integrative with the school counselors. So we don't refer kids to our own counselors. We don't refer kids to an app where they get counseling. We work with the school system to provide, sometimes within 24 hours, appointments with caregivers with kids that are suicidal, that are drug addicted, that are bullied, that are depressed. You know, there's some of these school systems, these parents don't know where to turn. It's not like the Halftime folks where we can pick up the phone and get some referrals. These people have 2 jobs, single parent families. They're on Medicare or Medi-Cal or insurance that they don't understand. And they're calling an 800 number on an insurance card to get an appointment for their kid that they barely see, that they know is in trouble. So we go into the school system, we give the counselors our platform, and sometimes within 24 hours, these kids are getting appointments with their insurance, matched for their condition in their community. And that wasn't even on my radar 5 years ago. Now I'm very involved in that business. And we 1 out of 4 kids in California are currently using Care Solis.
So Doug, let's take a minute and look at the poll, because that'll help guide the last 7 or 8 minutes that we have in our first 30-minute section.
Absolutely. So our poll is pretty clear, Lloyd. I'll go through the questions and a very clear response. And while I'm doing that, if you have not answered the poll, I would appreciate your input, because we will guide the rest of the conversation based on your answer.
Or ask your question. It's a good time to key a question in, right?
Absolutely. The question in the poll is, everyone has experienced pain. In what way has the pain of your past most impacted your journey? The first answer is, it produced fear that has limited me. The second answer is, it created an underlying anger that sometimes impacts my leadership. The third answer is, it drove me to activity and performance to overcome pain with optimism. The fourth answer was, it propelled me to success. And the final is, through God's grace, it made me turn to God in deeper ways than I ever would have. And Lloyd, that has 77% of our vote, is that last answer, through God's grace. And second to that is, it drove me to activity and performance. But by far, the vast majority of our audience, through God's grace, it may be turned to God.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it, Jon?
Well, that's part of my story. When I lost Eric and Steve, I was very involved in their lives. They were 1 and 2 years younger. And, sometimes I choke up when I talk about it. And sometimes when you get healed from pain, it doesn't mean the sadness goes away, because when you remember, sadness comes with that. But God's given me an eternal perspective. But I do know when Eric and Steve were gone, it was so abundantly clear to me that there was very little that I could control. And I had to come to this point of surrender. In business, sometimes it's different. You can just, if you do certain things, and if you do certain things well, you're going to get certain results, and it's measurable, and it's KPIs, and what gets measured gets done, and all that, which is true. But life's very different than that. And when you lose, literally my left and my right arm, we were always like this. You realize real quick that you're not in control. So for me, I came to that point of surrender. And that's actually very consistent with drug rehab, which we don't do at Natural High, but I'm an expert at that. Is in most drug rehab, you go to this point of surrender. and you surrender to a higher power. So for me, it's about really surrendering bitterness. It's about forgiveness. It's about letting go of resentments. It's about letting go of your anger. I mean, God can take your anger, but at a certain point you have to get past that. And the only way I think I was able to do that was through God's grace. And I was able to forgive, and I was able to get an eternal perspective, and I was able to come to terms, with the loss and kind of move on. So it is true. I guess our listeners responded. Life has a way of letting you know that you are not completely in control, and surrendering to God for guidance is such a good thing.
So, the identifying your passion that comes out of pain is one thing, and knowing what to do about it is another. And you have the context that you have to figure out, the role you're going to play, how much time you're going to allocate to it. That's part of what you and I worked through in your journey, is trying to nuance that. And should you do some business outside of this? Should it be mostly natural high? And one of the pains in my past, Jon, that's driven me is when I came to Halftime, I sent out 40 letters. It was before, email and stuff. So I sent 40 letters to ministries, all of which you would know, offering my time for free. And I basically got 40 rejection letters back.
Wow.
And then I started volunteering with an organization. They didn't value my time. They had a totally different culture. They didn't really have, they hadn't been through corporate boot camps. So they didn't have effective systems. And it was a real downer to try to find a place to use my talent. And it was costing me a ton of money every year to be doing that when it could have been developing real estate. And I remember the chairman of the board of one of the ministries that I was working with just saying to me, Lloyd, if you want to figure out how to make a contribution, he said, first, I know you have every excuse to just quit this idea of giving back and go back to developing buildings and live happily ever after. And he said, but I know you don't want to do that. He said, you're just going to have to figure it out. Right. And that's part of what you've been working on. All of us have to do that. And the thing I wanted to end this 30 minutes on is that it doesn't have to be big. Sometimes we think, wow, Jon, has built an organization that through the internet and the captivating videos, Common Core curriculum approval, it's touching millions of kids' lives. But do I have to do something big? And I remember one afternoon that you and I spent was probably the most meaningful and intimate afternoon we had together. We had been speaking at an event together and in your hometown. And then you said to me as we were walking out the door, can you come with me for something? And it wasn't on our plan. We were going to go biking. And one of your close friends had almost died and we went and picked him up in a rehab center. And it was just one person that you cared deeply about. So take us into that story and how that juxtaposes to the stuff you're doing that seems such large scale.
Well, I think for all of you who are listening, my encouragement, I feel led to say this, my encouragement is that the hard things that you've been through in life have qualified you for greater work in the kingdom. And it can be one-on-one. I mean, Jesus was a master at small groups of people. He had, 12 disciples. So all of us are getting qualified through our life experiences. And sometimes that qualification is as simple as reaching out to a neighbor or picking up the phone and talking to someone. It doesn't have to be something big. And the most meaningful things that have happened to me in my life aren't big things. They're one-on-one things. So that was a situation where Carl, one of my dearest friends in life, Daniel Carl Funk, he was suffering from a severe depression. And we picked him up from an institution and put him into another institution. And Carl ended up taking his life last November. this is my buddy Carl. He was a mountain of a man.
Hmm.
And he was a man of faith, similar to my brothers. And I have an eternal perspective. Carl and these guys they're talking about me right now. Or maybe not. They probably forgot all about me. But I was able to minister to Carl because I had been close to a situation like that with my brother. And I was uniquely qualified to go and pick him up and go and spend time with him. And, we were very involved for, probably 6 months in him trying to get better. He had a wife and kids. But look, we live in a broken world, and I can't imagine anyone on this call hasn't been touched by pain. And some of the biggest and most profound movements in history have started with one person pushing through that pain. Especially nowadays, when you think about what's been going on the streets of America, and you go back over the history of civil rights. It was the one lady on the bus. It was the one man that made the march, Martin Luther. It was William Wilberforce in England. All these people were qualified by events that marked them. But I would encourage all of us to remember that it's part of your story. Your pain is part of your story. It's not some hidden chapter in your life. It's actually part of your story. And God sees it all. You can't hide it from him. So it's best to bring it into the light. If you need to get healing and counseling and prayer through it, do that. I did a lot of prayer, a lot of counseling, a lot of healing. And then use that in your life as you march forward in this world. And it makes you a trusted warrior that people will embrace, because you don't have all the answers, but you do have perspective and wisdom
and empathy. Every time that I have the privilege of helping someone in Halftime find a pathway to a way to really use everything they have to contribute to God's kingdom, it's driven by the pain of my own past, of not having no one making a market between the talent in the business world and the biggest needs in the communities. So, and it can bring you so much more joy than hiding our pain. So, Doug, let's make a transition then and look at some of the questions that are coming along. And if they're really challenging ones, if you don't mind, pass them to Jon. If there's a few easy ones, send them to me.
Well, John and Lloyd, this was just fantastic. And we know that some of you only allow about 30 minutes. If you've got to run, we understand that. The second half of this will be primarily Q&A, and you'll get a copy of the link to the recording. You can catch that. Or if you want to ask a question, type it in right quick. Even if you've got to leave the program, you'll get a unique email with the link to exactly where your question is asked, and you don't even have to watch the entire program again. So, Jon, are you able to stay and answer a few questions?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So you can, like I said, anybody in the audience can go ahead and type their questions even while I'm asking them. So our first one, Jon, comes from Jay. And Jay asks, thinking of the timing of national events, a good piece of America has maybe more pain than normal right now. Could you please share some of your own thoughts about how God is at work and some of the related opportunities that may be developed out of this current circumstance?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I know if you're a follower of Jesus, you know that he was all about the underserved. He was all about the poor and the brokenhearted, the woman at the well, the blind, the sick. So I think that mercy and that grace and that love is the answer. And we come at it from a Christian perspective, from a faith perspective, because we believe that we don't have the power in and of ourselves wholly to express that, but through Jesus, we can get there. So I just think we need more of that. We just need more love and more grace and more forgiveness. I love the stories of policemen laying down their batons. I think in some neighborhoods they couldn't do that, but in some neighborhoods they could. But if you go back in the civil rights movement, God's been at the center of all of them. So I'm just hoping that he is showing up for sure. I mean, we don't know I don't pretend to know where and how God's moving, but I do know that I knew when George Floyd died, God wept. That figuratively, that I do know.
Yeah, and so did all of us. One thing, Jon, that I'm noticing in the last 3 days, my days are filled with conversations with guys like you and I, men and women in the Halftime Institute, literally all day long. From 8:00 this morning, we started the day with a 2.5-hour halftime roundtable with 6 or 8 business leaders, and this was top of mind with them. The first 20 minutes was just this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 2 days, every single person I've coached, with one exception, when I asked them, what's happening? How are you doing? What would you like to work on today that would be most meaningful to you? They just say, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm confused. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that stood out is very often we need a Sherpa to help us figure out a pathway to make a contribution. It's intimidating to try to figure out where to go make a difference other than just writing a check and playing another 18 holes. And so you need who in your community is bilingual and speaks the language of need in the communities where they most need it, and can help pave a way for you down there, and with the understanding of your strengths, like you learn at the Halftime Institute, your passions, your core contribution, then to have someone that can be a pathway leader, light the path like a Sherpa. It's just so difficult to try to find your way on your own, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, I'm not sure what's underneath it all, but typically research has shown in behavior change and drug prevention, people listen to people that have a story like them. People listen to people that look like them or they can relate to, which is understandable. So at naturalhigh.org, for example, we have storytellers. We have over 40 different storytellers. And the kid from Coronado, the 4-story house in Coronado, is going to be attracted to a different storyteller than the kid from inner city Detroit. But we have storytellers of each type of demographic to relate to people of different social economic status and different race. And that's extremely important. If you're going to, for this type of ministry, it's extremely important to relate to the people. Like, it's really bad that I lost my 2 brothers, but there's kids that have listened to my video that have like, well, that just happens every day around my street. But they're going to listen to the next storyteller at Natural High that grew up in the inner city and had the same influences around them that they had, but made a path. And that's the person they're going to say, wow, I can follow that Sherpa. I can relate to that guy because he looks like me, he talks like me, he listens to the same music as me, and he's got a story that resonates truth, and I'm going to follow that person. So that's a powerful concept.
I got an email this morning, bright and early, Jon, from a CEO that has thousands of employees, and it was a 2-page, heartfelt, you can almost see the tears on the paper, to every one of his staff, of repentance, of what we're going to do as a company about this. And we're going to look for talented men and women of color that we can hire rapidly, and we're just going to get after it as a team and make a difference. And that's his sphere of influence, and he has the ability to move the needle there, but he may not be able to influence a kid that has no financial literacy, for example. And yet I know other people who are great at that. So I think if we all just make up our mind, I'm not just going to circle back into my little safe and comfortable bubble and hope it passes. But I'm going to figure out what's the one thing I can do and then take a risk. Hope that answers that question. I know we have 5 more, so we better keep moving, Doug.
Yeah, but what a powerful question, Jay. And Thank you so much, John, for your insightful answer, as Jay has also mentioned in the comments. Our next question, what is the possibilities of someone who's literally addicted actually getting over their drug addiction, especially if they choose to do it without outside help?
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to remind all of you that naturalhigh.org is free, and I want to help you help the people around you. So please go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. I write a lot of them, and you can be a mentor to people in your life. You can be a mentor to kids, grandkids, friends through the tools and the program that we have. On addiction, my heart goes out to the person that wrote the question, if this is someone they know. I don't think it's possible to kick addiction without outside help. This is my own personal opinion, but it's based on a lot of research. I do think there are great resources that you can plug into to help that person with addiction, but it's going to be at some point they need to take a step forward, and they need resources to help them push through addiction. One of the reasons I focused on prevention is we're spending about 80 cents a kid, 90 cents a kid for our prevention program. Rehab is $30,000. It's a crime. It's a shame. I believe everybody in America should have at least one shot at rehab if they're addicted. It's not a moral failure, addiction. It's not a moral failure. Chemistry is not character. And this is the repentance that we've gone through in the addiction world. We used to think it was a moral issue, but now we understand that the chemistry actually hijacks the very part of your brain that can make rational decisions. If somebody's addicted, they are going to need help. And if you get a hold of me after this through my email, I can give you specific resources to have a whole host of really good resources to help that person with addiction, but they will need outside help. No way. I haven't, there's been a couple of God shots I've seen, but normally when somebody like turns to God and gives up heroin, there's a pastor involved, there's a counselor involved, there's a parent involved. It's never just a solo journey.
Great answer. Thank you so much, John, for that. Tom asked the next question. What should a person do when a friend or a member of the family is suffering with addiction? How to help them the best? Well,
in most addiction situations, there's the addict and there's the codependent ecosystem, and you need to work on both. And most people know that, and it's a bit of an art and a bit of a science, but it takes counseling. It takes a good, typically rehab facility. They just came out with a research report that said 12-step works. Everybody used to poo-poo 12-step. And you know what? The first 2 or 3 steps in 12-step is I am not in control. I need to surrender to a higher power. So the guys that originally started 12 steps were Christian. They were Catholic Christians that realized that they didn't have the power to overcome addiction on their own. And now they've got verified research that shows that 12-step is a very effective program. A lot of it depends on what drug they're on. If they're opioid addicted, there's some very specific medical protocols that you can use that can unhijack the brain from opioid addiction. But please, reach out to me through my email, and I will email you specifically. I love to do this, so you're not burdening me. I will email you specifically resources that you can, because it does take the family. It's not a solo deal. It does take the codependent system to get on board to help that person in pain.
Wow. Sounds like a very challenging situation to address when you're faced with it. Our next question, would appreciate John's email to connect others to his ministry who work and need to know how to bridge to that expertise with their youth and teen worship populations being served and being led to the Lord.
Well, I'll give it to you right
Thank
now,
you
and
so
Lloyd,
much
Lloyd, you're going to
for
follow
such
up. It's JONSUNDT at me.com, Jon Sundt at me.com, and the organization is naturalhigh.org.
Yeah, I just put it in there.
typed it in there. And
Sorry.
John, I wanted to add the note ended with thank you so much for such an encouraging dialogue.
I did a silent retreat, John, not long ago. And one of the guys called me at the last minute and said he thought he might not come. There were 9 guys for 2 days, over 2 days for a silent spiritual retreat, which most of the time were quiet except at dinners. And I said, well, how come? And he said, because my son's suffering from a substance abuse problem. I think I'm going to drag the group down. I said, well, just come along. And then when you bring it up, we'll see who else has a similar thing going on. And it was over 50% of the guys. It was a random group of Halftime alumni. So this is not an isolated thing. And this is why this is a big topic, turning your pain into purpose. It's a real deal. So Doug, we better go to the next question so we don't run out of time.
We've got one last question. This is from Lori. How do I cope or help my son who is in his early 20s, who is down the drug path and he's not looking for help?
There's a good organization called Al-Anon or Narcanon, which is for parents of addicts. And so there's a group that you can go in. Some of them are church-based, which is really a good resource. The resources that I can give you if you contact me can help you understand kind of the problem that you're dealing with. But there's going to come typically a point in time in his life where you're going to have your moment or moments. And now is the time to prepare for that. Most interventions require a clear path to rehab and detox in a 30-day or a 60-day or a 90-day program. So I would encourage you to research programs in the area. I would encourage you to let your son know that you are there for him when he falls and stumbles. And I would take a really hard look at anything that you're doing unwillingly that might contribute to his situation. Maybe it's money, maybe it's passive acceptance, but it's a very difficult situation you're in, and my heart goes out to you. I actually will pray for you, and please contact me, and I will give you additional websites that address addiction.
Lori, thank you so much for your question. We appreciate you attending, and we're sorry for your challenge. I had a prodigal daughter for 12 years, so I can definitely relate.
Let me just say,
Lori,
I'm sorry. I just want to say one thing. There is so much shame around addiction. That's why it's Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're starting to understand that mental illness and addiction are not character failure or moral failure. They're chemistry failure. But part of it is people just are embarrassed. Like, maybe I'm a bad parent because my kid's an addict. Maybe I did something wrong. Well, you didn't. Most of the time, it's not an issue with your parenting. Almost all the time, it's just an issue of the peer pressure, the environment they're in, the predisposition. There's a whole host of issues. So I just want to encourage everybody out there that if it's something that's in your ecosystem, bring it into the light and reach out and get resources like Natural High and others. I'd love to share. And there's a lot of help out there available.
So, John, I want to end on this one piece that I think is interesting is when you work in a space where you're using the pain of your past to provide purpose for the future, by definition, there's a certain emotional hit you take. Not everybody you help gets well. Not every child that goes through naturalhigh.org programs stays off drugs or substance abuse. And so part of the balance to that is to infuse your life intentionally with the things that fill your battery, that fill your heart and your soul. And there's two things that you do that I think are wise. And I just wanted to spend a minute on these. One is that your DNA requires a huge amount of adventure. It's just in you. And secondly, that you need silence, and you do some of the craziest things, like go to your ranch and stand out on the back patio and worship with big, loud, bad singing at the top of your lungs. Like, I wish everybody could see what that looks like, or hear it even would be worse. so
You don't
take
want to
us.
hear it.
Yeah, I've heard it. And it's actually I just think it makes God just smile. I just think so tell us, your roadmap, the fifth column is adventure. The whole column, one out of 20% of your plan is adventure. So why is that important, and what do you do about it?
Well, I believe, part of me was like, every column has to be productive and every column has to be for the world. But I realized that, Jesus went off into the mountains alone at night for long periods of time. Even Jesus, it says he went and spent time in the mountains. So for me, I need to get recharged. And I realized that if I surf, if I go on these exotic surf trips and challenge myself and lose myself to the environment, or if I go up to my ranch and there's nobody around up at north of Santa Barbara and lose myself in worship, it frees me, and it kind of almost purges me, and I come back and I'm healthier. It's kind of like, probably not a good example, but that Jack Nicholson, when he said, he walked over the lines on the sidewalk and he was crazy, and he said, you make me a better man. My wife, sometimes she'll look at me and says, you need to go surfing at the ranch. She knows, you need to get the heck out of here and go do what you do. And I think all of us have that. And I think I've seen it with pastors. I've seen it with people of influence. You've got to recharge, and then you come back and you're like ready to hit it. So yeah, it's an important part of my life. And you, Lloyd, helped me realize that it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it is.
Well, the deceptive thing is when you find your calling, it brings so much joy. It's hard to convince yourself you need a break from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the same problem I've had. And by October of every year, for the first 15 years of this 22-year journey of serving people in halftime, I would get to October, and when I would start falling asleep at night, I'd twitch and twitch. Like it was just, I was just root tired at the core. And Linda was the one who finally said, you got to create a better system for recharge, to put restorative fun into your life. And so we sat down. This sounds pathetic, but we made a list of the things that I love that are restorative: beauty and classic cars and architecture. And so, we need outside people to help us see that. Great, you found your calling. It's rooted in the pain of your past. It fits your strengths. You've got a great platform. Now, just don't overdo it.
Yeah, everybody's got a mountain.
Term.
Everybody's got a mountain. You just got to go find it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you, Jon, for your friendship and for sharing your life with us. And
thank you.
And, we're so sorry for your loss many years ago, but God is redeeming it day by day in the lives of millions and millions of kids across this country and hopefully around the world.
Yeah. Thank you all for letting me share. And please, anyone listening, please reach out. Sign up for our stuff at naturalhigh.org, and God bless you all.
Jon, I like what Jay has written in the comments. I wish this were being broadcast on CNN or some major network right now. I'll be doing some sharing of this replay. And Jay, we appreciate you being here. A great question. And a matter of fact, Lloyd, Jay's question, which was our first one, was a topic we were talking about earlier as you were thinking about for our next live stream. Do you want to comment on that before we get to the top of the hour?
Yeah, on our next time together, we're going to include some people who have done remarkable things in responding to this crisis, this racial reconciliation crisis in our country. And it's just such a big felt need on all of our hearts. And I know that because every single coaching call I've had, this is a big felt need in every single person's heart and mind. So we're looking forward to that. We're shaping that up right now. We changed the agenda for what we had in our next webinar, and we look forward to telling you all about that in an email coming very soon.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. This has been so insightful. Jon, thank you so much for sharing such a heartwarming story, so beautifully told, but so inspiring. Thank you for that. And I want to thank everybody who's taken an hour of your time this evening, asked such great questions, and we look forward to seeing you in our next event. So right now, we ask you to stay well and stay healthy, and we will look forward to seeing you in our next event. Bye-bye.